Good day, everyone. Richard Cowperthwait for Northwest Access TV. Thanks for joining us for another show. And happy to have two folks on the show today. And again, we're taping this show on, boy, I guess we're talking at the wrong date, seeing as I had to scrap yesterday. Friday, May 10th is when we were taping the show. And very happy to have on board Jim Hughes, the former longtime Franklin County State's Attorney, excuse my voice already, and former Vermont Judge Greg Rainville. I hope some of our viewers, I interviewed these folks, a couple of hours each a while back. Hope some of our viewers saw those shows. They were some of them, two of the most enjoyable interviews for what that's worth I've done. And I thought it'd be fun to have these guys sitting down together, and that's just what we're doing. Anyway, I guess I have to start, Jim. I guess you dealt with Judge Rainville more than a few times in court over the years. Would that be accurate, or a few times anyway?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
As a judge, as an attorney, because Greg's been around for a while, wearing several hats, filling several roles. So,
did he treat you okay? Anything you want to say to get back at him right now?
Well, we were going to bring the boxing gloves and maybe square off a little circle here and settle old differences, but really there aren't any. I mean, he was a professional, and I hope I stayed within the bounds of ethics and treated everybody with the respect they deserved, and Greg sure deserved a lot. And so there weren't any, I mean, sure, we argued, and, you raise your voices every so often. Actually, when I first started, we had a judge on the bench who didn't always have his hearing aids turned up, and sometimes the loudest lawyer won.
Is that right?
Because that's the facts or the arguments the judge heard. But Greg wasn't like that, so we didn't have to yell or scream or stomp our feet much. We'd make our arguments, try to, point out the facts, remember the law, and we'd get a ruling. And the ruling says, that's it, sit down, shut up. But
some people did raise their voices. They didn't need to, but that's just.
And Judge Greg, how'd you fare with Mr. Hughes here? Did he do
Jim was
okay
always very respectful, and he was one of those individuals you'd relax a little bit when he came into the courtroom, as opposed to some individuals appear in front of you. You know that you got to really be on the ball, which is fine, nothing wrong with that, but that they were going to push the limits all the time, and so it's made your day a little tougher. But State's Attorney's Office was never that way, at least when I was here, and I spent a fair amount of time on the bench here, so very pleasant office to work with, and especially Jim and everybody. That was his character, and that's how he was known in the community of law.
Yeah.
So,
and I want to jump in and defend some of my brothers and sisters in the bar.
Yeah.
It's a role for the state's attorney.
Yes.
I mean, I'm an advocate, and this is an adversarial system, but I have to advocate to do the right thing, to make sure the law is followed, to make sure that justice is done, whether that's a conviction or not in a criminal case. But the role of a defense attorney is to advocate forcefully for their client.
Sure.
And sometimes justice and the facts and things fall to the side a little bit ethically, while the attorney's arguing for the client that hired them. So a lot of times an attorney's appearance of being loud or
aggressive
as opposed to just advocating is because of their role.
Yeah.
Not because of a personality thing or
that's
or that
absolutely
the
true.
lawyer is a jerk.
True. And we all know that, and that's all fine. It's just that there are some people who go well beyond that, and they go after every point, and so they lose the effect. And when you have an attorney who's more of an even keel, and then all of a sudden is really intent on the point they're trying to make, you have to listen, because there's something going on there.
So you would jump in at times if you had to, if an attorney was just going on too much about something? I mean, you obviously weren't afraid to jump into that, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, your office, you're always working on borrowed time. There's never enough time.
Right.
And the amount of energy that's expended both on the part of the litigants and on the part of a judge, you only have so much to get you through the day. And so if there's extraneous material coming in that's not really the kernels that you're looking for that are going to decide the case, and they're going on and on and on about stuff, you have to cut them off and say, look, let's talk about such and such. That's not really relevant. So, I mean, by and large, people try to do it the right way. There's no doubt about that. But, you know, it depends on who's in front of you, and it depends on what their client is pushing them to say as well. So they have to respect that.
Sounds like staffing. Have we got some more Vermont judges? Haven't I been hearing and reading about that? Are there some more judges that the legislature is finally throwing some bucks for? Greg, have you been following that? Or
Yes.
Jim?
So the House has a bill between staff and judges, between 80 and 90 more people,
Really?
which would include a handful of judges. The Senate had cut that back to 3 extra judges.
I thought I heard 3 judges.
Right, and I think about 50 staff statewide, and I'm not sure what roles.
Yeah.
3 judges, and I don't know where that's at. Today's supposed to be the last day of the legislature,
supposedly.
and I don't know if that's going to make the deadline or not. We're really hoping it does. One of the things we don't have in this state is a judge to cover you if you're on vacation or you're sick. Occasionally they'll bring in retired judges, of course, but sometimes they're in short supply, or the budget's not there to cover it, whatever. And that was, it made it difficult. If you took a week off and you had emergencies coming in, you had arraignments, juvenile cases, various things that have to be heard during the week, whether you're on vacation or not, there should be 1 or 2 judges statewide. There are 35 judges about.
Is that right, 35?
Statewide, and it doesn't count probate judges. But the rest of us, there are about 35 of us, and we need at least 40, and there wouldn't be any surplusage if we had 40 plus. But adding 3 is a big deal, and it's very helpful if it gets passed.
All right, we'll see. And Jim, speaking of staffing, I think we talked about this before. I mean, the Franklin County State's Attorney's Office, something tells me they could use a few more deputies. How many, ideally, how many more deputy essays? I mean, a couple, 3 or something, or?
Oh, that would be a luxury.
A luxury,
in Franklin
which
County.
no
We've
reason to
always-
think that's going to happen, right?
During my tenure there, we were always overworked and trying to convince people we were understaffed.
And how many
But-
I'm sure you can remember some numbers, I would guess. How many cases were you?
Well,
I almost hate to
Well,
ask.
being
numbers
filed
was-
is about 1,500 a year,
yeah,
Is that right?
but he's reviewing more than that.
Right.
right, because
Wow.
you don't bring, I try to bring anything that a law enforcement officer put their work into
Sure.
and found probable cause about. You know, that's what I thought our job was to do, was to make sure we prosecute not just the broken window offenses, but, you know, obviously the big crimes too. But and we had typically 4 and then 5 deputies and myself. And it got skewed when the courts sort of slowed down with the COVID coming.
Messed things up big time.
So at one point, I had, something close to 1,900 cases pending. And
1,900.
there's actually, the American Bar Association has numbers for lawyers, in the defense bar and for prosecutors, so the number of misdemeanors and felonies they should or could ethically and legitimately prosecute during the year.
Yeah.
And that's it's a 3-digit number. It's not, not as big as we had here in Vermont, and everybody's office was swamped that way. And then, there's different ways that was taken care of. So, some offenses where, when there's court time, are taken seriously, and like driving with your license suspended.
Yeah.
It's
Well, I remember
not a violent
John
crime, but-
Edwards and the state police chief, I mean, maybe decades ago, giving me the stat on how many people were out there driving with a license in it, whatever it was
And
well in the thousands.
Some
I
years
think.
you
It blew
figure,
my mind.
you think that it's almost everybody.
Yeah.
But there were penalties for it too.
So you started to say the serious crimes, and then you threw in DLS. I never considered DLS to be as serious,
Right.
unless it's
And
an
no-
underlying.
Right, and what I was leading up to was, if I had, and I wasn't doing the motor vehicle or the Title 23 cases, but I had one deputy
Yes.
doing Title 23, which is the motor vehicle laws.
Right.
And then at one point, things were just, we're trying to get the court back so that the court can work again and not have a backload of 2,000 traffic cases. And Judge Maley stepped in and essentially said, we're going to start over, and if it's a misdemeanor, it's not violent, there's no victim, and mostly if it's a DLS, they're just going to go away.
And in fact, I guess that happened all over the state. A number, hundreds, thousands of cases
sure.
ended up
Thousands.
getting thrown out.
Let me comment on the
COVID.
DLS thing for a moment.
Yeah, driving while license suspended.
Driving while license suspended. And it's not just handed out for people driving while under the influence of either drugs or alcohol. People's license gets suspended for a variety of reasons. If they don't pay child support, that can be one of the sanctions.
Oh, really? Interesting.
They can revoke their license. There are other ways, and the legislature has gone to, over the years, suspending licenses as a way to enforce certain conduct on people's part. It's an easy thing to bring about, but it causes an enormous hardship. Especially people living in Richford, Berkshire, Montgomery, Alberg. We don't have good public transportation, and people just would have a terrible time trying to come to court if they had court, or trying to get to work, or trying to take the kids to babysitters. I had one extreme case up in Orleans where a woman had many DLSs, and she came in on a subsequent charge with a lot of priors, so it's an enhanced penalty case. The state was asking for something like 6 months to a year in jail for DLS.
Wow.
Turns out she had 3 kids she was raising as a single mother.
Wow.
She lived up in one of the towns way out, away from any grocery store or any services that could be provided to her. She didn't have any family close by. And she got picked up twice in one day, and she was grocery shopping for the family. That's what she was doing. And I was in a situation where I had to send her to jail for some period of time. I didn't have a choice because there was a minimum
Really?
that had to be imposed. But I made it as light as I possibly could. It was clear that this woman was, she wasn't going to the bars. She wasn't hanging out with friends, goofing off, doing something she shouldn't be doing. Not that hanging out with friends is something you shouldn't be doing, but I mean, what she was doing was something that was needed for the family. So that was a perfect case where driving, the license revocation was a harsh penalty. And the legislature really needs to take a look at that and come up with something else.
Interesting.
It's just the economic effect on a community, keeping people out of work. I could go on and on and on. Obviously, I'll stop here.
I always tried to look at what caused the suspension.
Yes.
Because if it is a DWI, or if it is a points, if you get 3 or more speeding tickets, you can get up. You get more than 10 points, you can lose your license for 10 days.
That's a 2-year
And
period.
if you drive during that 10-day suspension, that's something that I took a little more seriously, because you're thumbing your nose at the law.
Yes.
But I would look at what the cause of the loss of license was, and then what the reason for driving was, before we start talking about either filing the charge to add more points to somebody's license again, or a fine, or what kind of a sentence, if any, should happen.
This county was much more reasonable than a couple of the other counties that I was in terms of prosecuting DLSs, or being a little more lenient, or looking into the circumstances, not just accepting the charge, but looking into it and seeing what it was all about. But people get into a vicious cycle. I mean, all of a sudden they have 3, 4, 5 pending DLSs. They still have to go to work. They still have to do the shopping. They still don't have somebody they can rely upon. And all of a sudden, there's just no real chance that they're ever going to be able to pay these off and get a valid license. And that's why they had license amnesty a couple of times.
No, is that right?
Well, that problem, driving with licenses suspended, has been an issue for years and years and years. And there's been a lot of attempted solutions,
Yeah.
whether it be amnesty, taking the points off of certain offenses so that it doesn't lead to a license suspension. But it's been a tough fence because the state certainly has an interest in enforcing it and making sure everybody is licensed and meets the criteria for being able to drive and insured and things like that. So it's a conundrum.
It's a tough
Boy, it
balance.
sounds like an issue, nothing I have to tell you folks, but that's getting a ton of attention. Heard it on the radio, just a retail theft issue. That just sounds like, and I guess the legislature's looking at that. I just heard on radio news this morning, I guess now, if you steal, $899 worth of stuff, it's a misdemeanor. So the legislature's looking to change that. Didn't sound like a drastic change. I didn't hear them lowering the dollar
But the
amount.
legislature
I think I heard
did
if you get charged or a couple times in a short period of time, it's more serious, but that just sounds like merchants are going crazy about this.
I think it was the late 90s, maybe early 2000s, the legislature in Vermont changed it from $100 to $900.
Really, 100 to
And that's the
900?
felony level. Retail theft, it's
So you can
totally.
steal up to $899.
That's
And still be
unbelievable.
charged with a misdemeanor.
Right, that blows
Right,
my
and
mind.
it's totally different than the driving license suspended because people have legitimate reasons to drive
Right.
or needs anyhow.
As opposed to
to
stealing.
walking in and stealing things. And, having the calculator out and making sure they keep it under $900. But I think the legislature decided that since electronics were very expensive, but they were small, people were stealing them, and stealing one watch or one calculator or one phone or whatever would be a felony. They thought that was a little harsh, so they raised the rate to $900 for to make it a felony, which would be up to a 10-year sentence.
What do you think that figure should be to kick it into a felony?
Well, I'm opposed to stealing.
Yeah.
I think that people
are?
who steal from
That's a good thing.
businesses or individual people, it's one of those things that everybody knows is wrong. It's one of those basic crimes that should be dealt with. So I think that the $100 line is a good one.
Yeah.
It may not be the best thing to have a 10-year potential sentence
Right.
for a $100 theft, but don't put a minimum on it. Just make it a felony level. That's 1 year and 1 day. For if they want to make it gradations, $100, sure, it'll be a felony. And sure, felonies have a very important, what do you want to call it? If you get a felony conviction, it
Deterrent.
sticks to you. It's a stigma.
Sure.
But those stigmas only last 2 years now. People get expunged
Really?
for everything.
Is that right? I mean, no
Not
matter.
literally everything.
Not
A
literally
lot of-
But I
everything.
a lot of
mean, no matter
crimes.
what the conviction, if it's not wicked
If
serious,
it's not
you can
violent,
Yeah.
sexually oriented, if it's not a aggravated assault, murder, things like that,
Don't get expunged.
those don't get expunged.
But you can. But if it's not that, if it's
Property
a less
crime?
serious stuff.
Oh, yes.
So after
DUIs.
2 years after the conviction hooks in, you can get that expunged.
And you can
Really?
you can apply earlier with due cause. You have to set out your reasons for an expungement on your petition. Sometimes for misdemeanors and for marijuana cases, that's almost automatic.
Yeah.
I've seen petitions that say, I don't want this on my record. I can't get a good job. Boom, they're gone.
And this is
that's fine.
judges making this decision, I assume, on the expungement, or?
It started out that
attorney?
way.
Yeah.
And then as time went along, the legislature ramped it up and took away a lot of our discretion in terms of whether to grant the expungement or not. And now it's done administratively. Sometimes administrative staff will
Really?
get these motions because by statute,
Yeah.
let me back up for a little bit. So there's been a lot that's gone on in terms of decriminalizing certain offenses, and some of
Marijuana,
that is an
obviously.
excellent idea.
Yeah.
It just is. Okay. The problem is that it's being used with a broad paintbrush for everybody.
Yeah.
All right. So if you've got somebody with a pattern of conduct who's out there stealing because they're working for a fence, So they're walking into Lowe's, they're walking into Home Depot, they're walking into a lot of these major chains, filling up a flatbed with, cordless drills and chainsaws and generators, walking out past the sales crew right in front of them, out the front door.
And I guess that happens.
And that was going on repeatedly. In some of these cases I was seeing coming up, people have been charged 5, 6, 7 times, and no bail was set. They're being released the same day. They're going right back out the next day, and they've got a list when they walk in from the person they're working for. So that type of crime should be treated very differently than someone who's stealing something to put food on the table. I mean, those are the two extremes, right?
And I think that the change in the amount level between misdemeanor and felony really boosted the organized retail theft
I bet it
gangs.
did. How could it not?
Yeah.
And the other thing the legislature did was they cut into the judge's discretion in terms of how long someone's on probation. For certain offenses, if I put somebody on probation for a 2-year period, let's say it's a DUI second, typically on a DUI 1, they might get 1 year probation. They come back in a couple years later, they got a DUI 2. At that point, I was insisting that they would be on probation for 2 years unless they'd taken pretty direct action themselves. Now the legislature set that up so that the Department of Corrections has to file at the midterm a motion to terminate probation. And if the state's attorney doesn't object, in some cases, the judges doesn't have any choice, has to grant it. So if I issue a 2-year term of probation, I've got to do that knowing that's probably going to be cut in half.
Really? Interesting.
Except for more aggravated offenses, okay? And again, it's a good concept if people are doing the right things. If they fulfilled all the terms of their probation, they've taken it to heart that they've got a drinking problem, et cetera, et cetera. But there's no review of any of that. Everybody is being treated alike across the board. So the worst offender and the less offender, they're all getting the same benefit. And that's where the problem is, because they've taken out the discretion for judges to look at each individual case. And that's going to bite us bad.
Jim, you agree that it's gotten kind of too carried away or whatever with that? Or
They're following national models. It's happening at a lot of places. And it's too bad that it's hitting Vermont like this, because Vermont is small enough that prosecutors and judges can learn about people, can really learn who the defendants are, who the victims are. There's people in Franklin County, you see all the time. And when someone does something criminally, you can address it sort of personally. And that's being taken away because now there's real controls on the time frames of a sentence, the time frames of supervision on probation, whether someone needs to be held pre-trial because they've gone a little bit out of control, but they're committing misdemeanors, so there can only be a $200 bail, which isn't going to hold anybody. It's a national model that's being followed, and I don't think it's helping a small state like Vermont.
Interesting. Speaking of bail, might as well jump in there now. This sounds like for some folks, bail has become a four-letter word here. And
there are people charged with thefts who would walk into court with $200 in their pocket, so they could walk right back out in a very short period of time.
Figuring bail wasn't going to be more than $200.
I figured that was the maximum by law. So then, because that was happening, and people were right back on the street, and law enforcement was totally frustrated. Business owners are totally frustrated of seeing these people over and over again, and they're upset with the judges, of course, right? In part because they didn't know or didn't understand that our hands were getting tied. So one of the things I started doing in the last year was if a person came in with 3 or 4 charges, all misdemeanors, I started setting bail if it was justified. Bail's not justified in every case. It's not used for punishment. It's used to make sure people don't flee from their hearings and that they show up in court when they're supposed to.
Show up at their next hearing.
Yes. But the more charges they have, the greater risk of flight they are. And that's in the law, okay? So people show up, they've got a record already, They may have several pending cases. They show up and they have 3 or 4 charges that appear in front of me for an arraignment for. I started setting bail at $200 per charge. There might be 4 charges in the same case. Bail set at $800.
And you obviously could do that and did do that.
I did do that, and
sure.
I got a lot of pushback.
I bet.
Some heavy-duty pushback.
I bet.
And 2 weeks before I retired, the Supreme Court affirmed my decision doing that.
Really?
So,
Interesting.
that's the way I was interpreting the statute. The statute was vague on that point.
Really?
So it was
Interesting.
legitimate to argue it either way.
So
Okay?
they did affirm that.
They did affirm that.
And was that a case from one of your rulings that got to the Supremes?
Yes.
Really
Yeah.
interesting.
It was a one-judge decision. It was not a full panel decision. So it was an expedited decision on a case.
They still count.
They still count. They still count. So, but it takes, one of the other problems we have right now is about 50% of our judges have 5 years or less experience.
Wow.
A 5-year judge is not going to try that. I had 18 years.
Wow.
18-year judge with experience who is on solid footing if you do your homework and you build the record correctly.
Yeah.
And even then, I was in the vast minority. There weren't hardly any judges who were looking at the statute that way. They said, one case, $200, that's it. And I got looking at it and said, that's not what the statute limits us to.
Interesting.
And it's not effective. It's not working.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Do you think that's come back a lot? Crime. I wake up to WVMT every day and just about every day hear about someone who's, just been charged with retail theft for the 50th time. Just insane stories is there. And it sounds like you really dealt with that big time in your last days as a judge, the bail issue.
And it was very controversial.
Yeah.
And the thing I want people to understand is that's not across the board.
Yeah.
Jim would look at individuals. He's already talked about that.
Yeah.
I would drill down on individuals to see what their history was.
Yeah.
I'm looking for their history. I'm looking for a pattern of conduct. So, everybody needs to be treated as an individual. You don't apply the rule solidly across the board.
Yeah.
You only apply it when it's necessary.
Yeah.
Which is a very Vermont judicial statement right there, because you get into the big cities and the huge states.
New York City's getting this individual attention, Jim?
I doubt it.
Yeah.
But, no.
The sheer numbers probably prohibit that.
Numbers must be
and that's why
unbelievable.
the laws have to be sort of specific to the amount of time a person can be sentenced to, amount of time they could be supervised on probation, and the limits are put into the codes or into the laws, and they're impersonal. And they tie the hands of a judge, they tie the hands of a prosecutor, sometimes they tie the hands of the Department of Corrections.
And you made the point about national models, so it sounds like for Vermont's case, some of these national models, to your
in
thought,
my
just make
opinion,
little
humbly,
sense.
they don't work.
Yeah.
Well, also it was timing because COVID comes along.
Yeah.
The court system it's
ground to a halt pretty much, or not quite?
It didn't come to a halt. I worked every day.
Yeah.
But there were a number of judges who did not, because there were certain cases that were not being processed, landlord-tenant, for instance, and others. But I was in the criminal court, and so you had enough cases that came in. So among the 5 judges in Costello Court in Chittenden County, where I was, I was in courtroom 2B the last couple of years, and that's the hottest courtroom probably in the state in terms of just level of activity and, Anyway, so what happened, everything really slowed up with COVID. People weren't getting cited anywhere near as much. And at the same time, we had a lot of this decriminalization law coming forward. So, petty theft, grand larceny theft, drug problems, everything ramped up. So in the last 4 years, if you go back to 2020, this all started, we shut down the courts in March.
March 2020?
2020. I say shut down, we just limited the amount of activity, but we were operating at about 25%.
Wow.
Is about what I was seeing, okay? So, excuse me, and during that same time, we were having an influx of the drug problem. We seemed to have more people coming in from out of state trafficking drugs. all of a sudden we had everybody bearing a weapon. Everybody had a handgun. And all you have to do is look at the shooting statistics in the state, especially Chittenden County. But
Burlington gets some attention on that issue.
yeah, a whole lot. And, you know, you didn't see that in 1998, 1999, 2000, 2018, 2019. All of a sudden, 2020, and everything just kind of erupts. And so the drug problem got much worse. The shootings just tripled and quadrupled. What I'm seeing, I don't know the exact numbers, but I was following it pretty close. And an awful lot of increased crime, retail theft. So all this was going on. You had more crime, fewer cases being prosecuted, relaxed penalties being put in place.
Sounds like a perfect storm here.
You had a perfect storm.
Well, wasn't the main cause that everybody was wearing a mask? They thought they could get away with stuff because, you know, even the
That
security
certainly
cameras.
That's a good.
I remember the first time I walked into a bank wearing a mask
Wow.
because you needed it for COVID, and I was thinking,
Wow.
geez, if I'd done this a year ago, somebody had been calling the
You
police.
get to meet security.
Yeah.
How did your office fare with COVID? Did that, I mean, how did you deal? Did everybody keep coming into work every day, or how did that affect you folks?
Yes. You know, the state's attorney's office statewide issued some rules of how to do it and how to keep working and working from home if you had your Wi-Fi and things. But I asked people to come into the office, you know, do your social separation and keep your masks on, but we could appear in court over the computer, over the internet, have our remote hearings.
Yeah.
But I wanted people in the office so that when phone calls came in or emergency cases came in, arrests, juvenile cases, things that happen overnight and need to be addressed at 8:30 in the morning.
And they obviously kept
I need
happening, COVID or, yeah.
Right. I wanted people in the office so that we could all deal with these things.
Yeah.
Certainly there was, you know, and over the years, there were some times when people either got infected and wanted to not infect their coworkers, so they worked from home. Luckily, nobody was very sick or too affected by the COVID.
Within your office, you mean?
In my office.
In your office.
Yeah.
funny,
Worldwide, I think there were a few, but
We had some in Franklin County.
in the
died.
yes, no, and
no, for
I'm just
sure.
focusing on my,
Sorry.
I knew you were. Right?
Sorry.
but
I just got my COVID again. We're taping this show on Friday, May 10. I just got my latest COVID shot just yesterday, in fact. Still a pretty sore shoulder, but I hadn't heard much about the latest shot. I don't know if people are COVIDed out maybe a bit these days. Anyway, there's another shot out there if you want it.
Is there a third booster?
I'm up to date, so I guess
I
so.
think so.
All I know is I
No kidding.
got a shot yesterday.
I didn't know the third booster was
Yeah.
I have to talk to your doctor.
Has
And
the state,
do it in your tennis arm because
In my
the more
tennis
you
arm.
the more you work the muscle, the faster the pain goes away.
I purposely did my left arm.
right.
Has the court system come back pretty much from COVID, or will it never like totally get back from this?
Well, there's still a lot of remote hearings going on.
Is that right? Really?
People calling in and being on the big screen in the court, and I think that's been a change.
Because it's easier to do that, or
Well,
Many reasons.
yeah,
Many reasons.
easier is a big
So
broad
let
word.
me jump in on this.
Okay.
Then. So, tens of thousands of dollars were put into upgrading the courthouses, not only the air handling systems, which should have been done anyhow.
HVAC stuff? Yeah.
Yes, some of these old courthouses just have lousy air conditions in them.
Grand Isle County comes to mind, hasn't it? Is that an ongoing issue over in the islands?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when it came time to get the court system going again and trying to start up with jury trials again, they were going around the state, courthouse to courthouse, and they were measuring the air factors. And some of the newer courtrooms had much better airflow, and airflow had a lot to do with COVID. So if you had stagnant air, you're much more apt to be spreading the COVID diseases. Anyway, so one of the other things that came out is all of a sudden we got all these big screens in the courtroom, and we got connections so that we could conduct hearings remotely. People could jump on a laptop, could jump on their phone, their smartphone, and participate in hearings without creating a risk of contracting COVID because they're at their home. Now, there's some real downsides to that. when you have people at home, it's difficult for a judge. I mean, I actually had people just close their laptop and leave the hearing when they were supposed to be participating in the hearing, either as a defendant or in one case, it was a mother whose rights, termination of parental rights hearing was taking place. And somebody was knocking at her door, and she left to go answer the door. And when she came back, I said, please don't do that. You are in court, even though you're in your kitchen. You are in court. So please act like it. And she did it again. And then she just closed her laptop and was done with it. So, and then you have people walking through. You have all kinds of stuff that happens when people are
dogs
participating.
Barking, whatever.
Dogs barking. But people DLS, for instance, who had an important hearing to attend and they had trouble getting rides, they could participate remotely. It was huge. In terms, for instance, when I was up in Orleans County and you're doing juvenile cases, you need attorneys to represent the parents. And they couldn't find enough attorneys. If you use remote access, attorneys in Chittenden County could participate from their offices and represent someone. And so that was a wonderful facilitation of the use of remote access. And
so some benefits to this.
some major benefits. If you had an expert witness in a case, instead of paying tons of money, have them fly in. They could participate remotely. Now, the downside to it was, for instance, we were doing arraignments, people weren't coming in, attorneys weren't coming in, we were all doing it on the screens. I'm talking to a screen, talking to the attorney, talking to the defendant. Well, they weren't signing their paperwork. The attorneys sometimes weren't meeting their clients. And so when we had a subsequent hearing, they hadn't filled out the public defender forms, they hadn't signed their conditions of release, they hadn't met with their attorney, we hold a hearing, they don't show up. And this was happening a lot in the first few months when we started up again in 2021, okay? And so at some point, in Chittenden County at least, I got together with the other judges and said, look, we got to start insisting people come back to court. And the attorneys who didn't like remote participation initially had now gotten used to it, now knew how to handle it, and now they didn't want to come back to court. So it took some push. But yes, now things are pretty well back to full activity. But now we're using the remote access as a benefit as opposed to a necessity.
In your office, do you think you need to eventually get back to kind of quote normal functioning after COVID, Jim? Or
I quit.
No, you could.
I retired right as this was
and you've been out
coming along.
You've been out almost two years now, huh?
October, I believe it was the 22nd was my
2022.
2022.
Wow.
And that was my official retirement day.
So you had,
I was in the middle of this, and it just...
Was that a factor in your not running for another 4-year term, the COVID stuff, or?
Yes.
For sure. So you
for
might,
sure.
without that, you might have,
everything we've talked about was a factor.
Plus Odyssey.
The way, corrections has been sort of immobilized. Nobody's being sent to jail unless there's, a very violent,
Really
bloody
serious.
crime. It's not being used as a corrective instrument anymore.
You're talking incarceration.
Incarceration, sure, and probation too, because probation's now cut in half no matter what the set term is. At the midpoint, probation files a motion if the state's attorney doesn't see it to object. By the time the court acts on it, it's over and done.
Is there any feeling, again, that this has gone too far? Sometimes you just see in politics things get, go one way and then they start coming back a little bit. Is there any sense that there's a feeling, hey, things have gotten just,
Well, again, it came down to this perfect storm we talked about. So I don't want people to hear this and say, well, they're beefing on the legislature. The legislature got caught in this storm.
Sure.
They didn't realize there was going to be such a surge in the drug activity or in the thefts or all these other things at a time when they're diminishing both the ability to make people attend court and also to sanction them if they're convicted.
Or enhancing the workforce by expunging criminal records.
Exactly.
That affects...
Well, I don't think I was
too.
aware of that. I think that's new news to me about how you can expunge convictions that easily.
Yeah, and
and then we had the youthful offender program, where all of a sudden people up to age 22 with some fairly serious crimes
Yeah.
don't have to go to adult criminal court.
Really, up to age 22?
Up to age 22.
Really?
And those offenses all get erased, all get expunged.
Wow.
If they can be prosecuted, because in some, you can't bring someone who's 21 to the juvenile court, and there's no services through the Department of Children and Families for a 21-year-old drug dealer.
Wow.
There's no place to house them in the state as a juvenile offender or youthful offender.
No juvenile
So-
detention facilities.
Correct. So there's a huge problem there.
Yes. Yes.
There's, a recent arrest of adult and a juvenile again, who's 18, dealing drugs in St. Albans. And the 18-year-old had the fentanyl and the heroin, in his pockets,
Yeah.
and the adult had the money, which is not a crime. But when the arrest happened and all the evidence was on the youth, it really stymied what police could do or the prosecutor's office could do to try to address this.
Well, it sounds like they're just hearing a lot of references to just hands being tied and stuff.
And to talk about the way the pendulums swung
Yeah.
nationally,
Yeah.
with the lack of respect for law enforcement,
Yeah.
the defunding of police departments across the country, the defunding and evisceration, if you will, of the departments of corrections around the country.
Yeah.
It's a terrible situation, and people are just starting to realize, with gangs of organized retail thieves, with the amount of drugs that are coming from all sorts of places, and just the petty crimes that are now really making life not as pleasant to live. When you're walking down the street and you're accosted, or you witness thugs or public intoxication, and the police sort of have their hands tied. I think, a sad situation, and I'm hoping that the pendulum swings back.
And it's
But
made
hard-
it tough on business owners.
Absolutely.
Retail
I mean, you
business
see,
owners have been,
I think everybody has seen literally
they are
people
just
walking.
being hammered with
Right.
thefts.
And then sometimes an employee will try to jump in and stuff, and then they're told, "Oh no, don't do that. Let them."
Well,
No, it sounds.
The business
crazy.
attorneys representing those businesses
Yeah.
advise them not to, because if they hurt the thief, that could be a simple assault. It could be an unlawful detention, an unlawful arrest. There's all sorts of civil potential penalties that can cost the store or owner their store.
They may get a hit out of this. Wow.
And the people who are in that criminal activity regularly,
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the occasional person.
Yeah.
I'm talking about people who are doing it regularly.
Yeah.
Those people have been emboldened.
Yeah, that sounds like a good word for it.
And they're doing things you wouldn't even think they'd be doing 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And when if a salesperson spots someone who they know has been stealing things from the store and starts following them around, it's unbelievable, the audacity of the conduct on the part of these people. It used to be, if you did that, the person would leave the store.
Yeah.
Not anymore. They'll steal right in front of your face.
Well,
I mean, it's
That's unreal.
because if they get charged, they go to court, they enter a not guilty plea generally,
So you
and
get
are released back on the street.
get released on conditions only to maybe do the same thing again the next day or something.
and so that's been the common experience.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of empirical studies that have shown that if you want effective punishment or effective deterrence, it's got to be immediate. You don't want to be doing it 6 months or a year down the road, even though that's typically what happens.
Yeah.
But as soon as you can, and one of the ways to try to contain criminal conduct is with conditions of release. You set curfews. People who are out after hours at night, drugs, alcohol, certain conduct, you make sure, you set a condition they have to be home by 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. Sometimes you have condition 4 responsible adults who monitor their activities, who can call the police if they're violating their conditions. Well, all of a sudden, conditions of release almost became meaningless. People were not abiding by them. Probation and parole were not making home visits during COVID for obvious reasons. Police were, using restraint.
And probably not stopping nearly as many people as they used to. They probably weren't going out of their way to do stuff unless it was pretty serious.
An officer would
Exactly.
approach a car, they stop, and the
Right.
person start coughing.
Wow.
And, you try to stay 7 feet back and talk about their license, registration, proof of insurance. That's a deterrent for that kind of law enforcement.
Boy, you're sure feeding into my concern. As I've acknowledged many times on shows here, I'm a glass half empty kind of guy. Boy, the criminal justice system, you just make it sound to me like it's in pretty tough shape here.
But the pendulum is swinging.
You think it is?
Oh, it definitely is.
Yeah.
There are people realizing
Yeah.
the extent of the problem that we have, which is the first step, right?
Yeah.
And I've even talked to some legislators who have said, they're beginning to look at this differently now
Yeah.
and seeing, and so I think we've reached the worst point,
Yeah.
and now we're swinging back toward moderation,
Interesting.
which would be nice if we could moderate a lot of things that are going on in
Jim, do
society.
you see that the same way, or are you not quite as optimistic as the judge here?
I don't think we're swinging back yet.
Yeah, you don't think at all, really?
Well,
Not much?
I'm more looking at the national picture.
Yeah.
I hope that things will happen quicker in Vermont because we are small enough to be, nimble in the legislature and change things that need to be changed.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of ground to regain, in my mind.
That's for sure.
And it was
That's for sure.
October of 2022. I felt it was a good time to get out of law enforcement.
Yeah.
I'm old enough.
After how many years?
I worked for the state of Vermont since Groundhog Day 1987.
Wow.
So it's 35 and a half
That's
years.
a pretty good hunk of time.
Yep. I almost made the record I know of
That's
Dale Gray.
As long as serving state's attorney?
No.
No.
Dale Gray worked 36 years.
Caledonia County,
In
right?
Caledonia County, yep.
So he
And I made-
had one more year than you.
Half, 6 months.
Oh, is that
6
right?
months more than you.
So you
But,
almost had
You
that
couldn't wait
record.
And I
7
was
months to
thinking back,
retire.
I was thinking back to some of the old guys, when I first started, because at the beginning of the show, you were addressed as Judge Greg. And Judge Greg was famous in Franklin County back in the 60s.
The prior Judge Greg.
Yes.
Prior Judge Greg.
Well, his last name, Greg.
Last name's Greg, right.
Wow. So it sounds like you got at it a good time. You don't. you
For
don't
me,
wait- you don't-
personally-
you're not missing being an SA anymore.
No,
Yeah.
I'm not.
You still check in with you still keep track of how the office is doing to some extent?
Well, I worked with some of the folks there for a good long
Of
time,
course,
and
your
they're friends.
successor, John Lavoie, didn't fare so well, but now Bram
Sorry to hear that,
Kranitz-Feld
but,
in command,
Yep.
and some of the same deputies.
And
of course,
Bram
right?
actually has some experience in Franklin County. He was he did an internship when he was first licensed in my office.
Oh, really?
And so we had some experience with him before he then went to Chittenden County, and now circled back to Franklin.
Yeah.
But I think he's got a good head on his shoulders, and he's going to do well. I tried to instill in everybody in my office that, we don't represent the police, but we should support the police in their hard work. And we need to have our eye open for the victims of the crimes that are being sent to us for prosecution, because these folks got dragged into the criminal justice system against their will and didn't deserve whatever consequence of the crime that they're suffering, so we need to prioritize them. And then hopefully they'll keep that up.
Craig, you decided you're not doing anything as a retired judge. You mentioned retired judges still jump into the fray once in a while. You decided not to do that, or am I wrong about that?
December 21st was my last day, and I've been busy with other things.
Other things.
Been in the wood chiggering and doing some logging and helping people construction projects and just.
So do you miss being a judge? Do you miss
Of
that?
course, of course.
I mean, what,
But
17,
at the
18
same
years?
time,
Yeah.
I've lost a bunch of weight. My blood pressure's gone down. I don't wake up in the morning with that weight on my shoulders, and it's
Okay.
like, okay, what's coming at me today? How do I handle this? And even though I felt like I thrived in that, under those conditions, you do it for a long time. It wears on you.
Yeah.
18 years. It's time to let someone else step in.
Yeah. How'd you fare with sugaring? It sounded like I was hearing kind of mixed reports on sugaring. Not a great year?
half a crop, right?
Half a crop?
Well, it depends. Some people did really well.
Really?
The people down near the shore, when that warm weather hit us about the third week in March,
Yeah.
it cut sugaring very short.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of half-crop places.
Yeah.
When you get up in the colder areas, you get up in Coal Hollow and Enosburg, or you get up in Franklin, where I was sugaring with
Yeah.
a cousin of mine, the higher elevation areas did quite well.
Fared better. Yeah.
They had good volume.
Interesting. Of course, I'm talking to with Greg here, the former chairman of the Franklin County Democratic Committee. We've talked politics before. Any thoughts on possibly a political future? With, of course, the next election not too far away here.
Yeah, I think you have to announce your intentions by the end of this month.
Well, here's the microphone.
Still, love to hear it. Love to hear it right here.
I like suspense. It's
But something you're
under
thinking
deep
about?
consideration. Let's put it that way.
Really interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I've been meeting with some folks and talking to folks and kind of watching to see what's going to happen and see what happens in the county senate. And we'll go from there.
Jim, another good fellow Democrat here. Any thoughts to a legislative run or anything like that? Has that crossed your mind?
No.
No.
It's,
Last
A,
thing.
way too soon, and B, I had a one-sided career
Yeah.
as a state's attorney. Like I said, we're looking to do justice, but it's a law enforcement office. I think that there would have to be some rounding out of my resume, and, I'm 66. I'm not going to go back to either practicing or trying to do something in the State House, I don't think.
So you're not practicing your lawyering days. You're definitely.
I still have a license,
You still have a
and
license?
I still could, and I've been,
Will you
but-
keep that up? Will you do what you have to do to keep that license active?
maybe,
Oh.
for the foreseeable future. There's a fee for a biannual registration to
Huh.
keep your law license active.
And is there
you
more
have to-
training? Is there more training you
You
still
have to do your
Oh, yes,
continuing
for
legal
sure.
education. You have to have a certain number of hours per year, including ethics, and I think there's now inclusivity trainings that have to happen besides just the application of the law and the new statutes and things like that. But hopefully I'll get an invitation to the training camp for the state's attorneys during the Judicial College this year, and keep my CLEs current, and that gives me the option of paying the dues and jumping back into if I need to.
That's right. Greg, what about yourself? Were you, is lawyering, maybe will that continue to be in your future, maybe in some respect?
Haven't decided that yet.
But will you keep,
Haven't decided.
you'll keep up your?
I'll keep up my license,
Yeah,
for
keep
sure.
up your license.
Yeah, it took too many years and too much sweat to get it, to just let it, I turned 70 in a week or so, and I'm healthy, I still have a lot of energy. I don't want to sit in a rocking chair quite yet.
Yeah, no, I certainly wouldn't expect that. Boy, it seems like, maybe not so much lately, but for a while I was seeing just a ton of stories about just way too many lawyers don't think about law school. Is that you pay attention to that? Are there too many lawyers out there, or has that situation gotten better? It seems like I was seeing.
We don't have enough in Vermont now.
So you could
We're-
use more lawyers
we're
in
hurting.
Vermont.
I think it depends on your point of view. If you're an attorney looking to build your practice
Yeah.
in a city with a lot of lawyers, there's
Yeah.
too many. If you're in the criminal court and on the bench and you're trying to find attorneys for clients so that your
Yeah.
case can go forward, and you need an attorney for a mother and a father and a juvenile
Yeah.
and maybe a guardian, then there's not nearly enough. So.
And there's no real young attorneys coming in,
Yeah.
not
is
in
that
this
right?
county.
Well, they're getting out of law school, and although my understanding is law school applications and the population is down some, the law is still a pretty popular
Yeah.
career, but not so much in rural places like this.
Yeah.
You want to go to the big city and make a lot of money, either the corporate road or
Yeah.
whatever. It takes a special person to come to a small town and wear many hats, be able to do wills and trusts and, divorces and family law, and represent somebody in the criminal court and represent somebody in the probate court. The old saying about small-town lawyer in Vermont really wasn't doing too well, then another lawyer moved to town, and now they're both doing okay. You know, you gotta have the adversarial system, there's gotta be enough people to be on both sides.
In Franklin County, are there any young, the deputy state's attorneys, any young folks in there, or the, you know? pretty
Well,
much
everybody's young compared to me now. But yeah, we have, I had hired a gal who was a DCF worker and was, you know, very bright and very
Department of
involved.
Children and Families. Yeah.
And was a social worker here in Franklin County and took some time off to go to law school. And as soon as she got her degree and got sworn in and licensed, I hired her. And threw her right back into the family court. You know, she landed on both feet because she knew her caseload and she knew how to work them, and it was great. And she's
That's a rarity to have someone like that.
that's a lot of luck
That's a
on
lot
my
of luck.
part,
Yeah.
for sure. But and I was lucky, on the other hand, to have experienced, knowledgeable people who weren't going to come into the criminal justice system all gung-ho trying to count their convictions and have a perfect record and, you know, no matter what, gonna get a guilty verdict or a guilty plea and, you know, be a hard-nosed prosecutor. Just, you know, I counseled against that from day one with everybody I hired. I told them, never count your wins and losses, mostly because if you're gonna go to trial, that means you've got a terrible case. The
And you
defendant
made- I
thinks
know you
they
made
have a
that point
defense.
before.
Right. That's, you know, there's a
Although
a
sometimes
glimmer of
people
hope
go
there.
because they feel like they don't have a choice, so state could have a strong case and people sometimes still go to trial.
But I don't want to count those as a
You don't wanna
victory
count
either.
those, right,
And so,
right.
you know, I just tell the new lawyers, tell the prosecutors that, you know, it's the right thing is what you're supposed to be doing, not
Right.
not just getting a conviction or building up a record.
As opposed to
And so,
bounty hunters.
Luckily, I've had, you know, a lot of people I worked with in my same age group and frame of mind that I think, made our office look pretty good because we did help people out even if they were the defendant and we're trying to convict them.
Well, down to about 1 minute. Any quick thoughts? It seems like I've heard Howard Dean's name mentioned in the news a bit. Any thoughts on former Democratic Governor Howard Dean maybe trying to make a comeback, Greg? Any quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting concept.
Quick, about 20 seconds or so.
I'm hoping he does run. I think
Yeah.
it's a better system when you have people on both sides debating the issues.
I think it'd be, assuming Phil Scott runs for re-election, which I think most people think he will, the Republican governor, I think that'd be a better race than David Zuckerman's bid, for example. It'd be interesting. Jim, any thoughts on Howard Dean?
Well, he's the governor who appointed me to be the Franklin
Wow.
County State's Attorney,
Really?
so.
Yeah, pretty good thoughts about this guy.
Yes, it would be good to see him. I think he's got a good head on his shoulders and addresses the issues.
Be interesting. It'll be an interesting political year, I'm sure. We're out of time. Thank you very much to Jim Hughes, a former longtime Franklin County State's Attorney, Greg Rainville, former longtime Vermont judge. Appreciate the time, and boy, something tells me I might like to grab you guys again in the future sometime. But good show. Thank you very
Thanks
much.
for having us.
And thanks to producer Josh Pryor for doing the hard work behind the scenes. I'm Richard Cowperthwait. Thank you for watching us here on Northwest Access TV. See you next time.